All right, we're solving using completing the square. So we are going to be solving quadratics, meaning terms with a degree of 2. Okay, they have a degree of 2, and I'm going to be solving these with a process called completing the square. Now, there's some smaller things that you have to be able to do this and be successful at it. So the first thing is you have to be able to solve a perfect square equation. So this is almost the end product of completing the square, but if we do this all at once, sometimes it can be a little much. So you have to be able to solve a perfect square equation. So this one right here, the first one, is the simplest one, where you take the square root of both sides, and you're just left with x equals, and remember, you must put a plus or minus symbol when you use the square root, so it's just plus or minus 5. That's ideal. That means x is 5 and x is negative 5. That means that there's 2 answers there. Okay? Now this one, a little bit more complicated just because 32 isn't a perfect square, but we have x is equal to plus or minus radical 32. So all we really have to do is reduce it. Okay, that's the extra piece. So 32 gets divided into 16 and 2, and the square root of 16 is 4. And always remember that plus or minus piece. So there's 2 answers there, plus 4 radical 2 and minus 4 radical 2. Okay, what you're going to see a lot is a question that looks like this, where you're going to have to solve this equation. And it's easier than it looks. Okay, so we need to get rid of the squaring, because x is inside these parentheses. So what we do is we just do the same thing. This is a perfect square equation. It's just got extra stuff in the parentheses. So all I need to do is take the square root, and that square goes away. So now the x minus 2 is free from the parentheses, and I'm left with plus or minus radical 44. Okay, and now I just solve. I'm just going to add 2. X equals 2 plus or minus radical 44. So that is solving a perfect square equation. Taking the square root of both sides, getting that plus or minus, and then solving the rest. Okay, you may have to reduce a radical here. So radical 44, just take this up here, is 4 times 11, so it's 2 radical 11. So 2 plus or minus 2 radical 11. We want to get to that point where you can then reduce this radical. But solving perfect square equations is where we want to be now. Okay? So another piece that you have to understand is what a perfect square is. Okay, so you do know that 36 is a perfect square, and x squared is a perfect square. But do you know that this guy here is a perfect square? All that really matters is that you have some sort of term, and you square it. Okay, so this is what we consider a hidden perfect square, because you have to factor it to see that it's a perfect square. So if I factor this guy, 2 things that multiply to 16 and add to 8 are 4 and 4. So these are exactly the same. So I can write this as x plus 4 squared. So this is now a perfect square. Okay? All of these, the rest of these are just like that. So if I factor this as x minus 3, and factored, it's x minus 3 squared. Okay, written as a perfect square equation. What you might notice if I change colors here is that this number is double this number. Okay, so if I take this number and if I divide it by 2, divide by 2, I will get this number every time. Take this number, divide it by 2, I get the 4. So that's a shortcut that we can do that gets us to this binomial. So I take the 10, divide it by 2, and I get negative 5. Same thing here. I take that positive 4, divide it by 2, I get 2, and that's my perfect square equation. Okay. Yeah, and what you might also notice is that these numbers here, and here, if 2 squared is 4, 5 squared is 25, 3 squared is 9, and 4 squared is 16. That's also part of this, because when we come down here and we come to actually solving the problems, so again, this is just a piece of solving. I want to make sure you understand the smaller parts of it. So when you're solving this, you're not given this number. You have to make that number up. So you can actually figure out the problem. And using this pattern that we discovered up here, if we take this 8, if we take the 8, divide it by 2, I'm going to get the number that goes in here. And then if I take this 4 and I square it, I'm going to get the number that gets added. So now this is a perfect square equation. This is the one that I just did up here. Up here, even though, you know, it's just here. There we go. See? It's a perfect, it's the same one. We just factored it. There and here we made it. Okay, so this one here, x minus 4, we need to add something to this and create the binomial. Now, I like to create the binomial first because that's where I get the number to square. So I take that negative 4, divide it by 2, and then I take that 2 and square it. So this number is we're always adding, okay, because when you square anything, it's always positive. So here, take 10, divide it by 2, I get negative 5, and then negative 5 squared is a positive 25. Now, we're going to get things where you have something that isn't divisible by 2, but that's okay. We just divide it by 2. No decimals needed, just write that and move on. So 5 over 2 squared now is what we have to do to get this number. So the top number is 25. The bottom number is 4. Just square the top, square the bottom, and you're done. This one, same idea. Take 3, divide it by 2, and you get the number in here. Square the top, square the bottom, and you have the perfect square equations. Okay, this one, take 16, divide it by 2. Okay, square the 8, and you get 64. That is it. Those are the 3 pieces to solving a perfect square equation, or solving using completing the square. So let's do this. Okay, these are the steps to solving using completing the square. We're almost doing backwards of what I just did because I wanted you to kind of understand the small pieces to getting here. Okay, I'm not going to read all these, but you can. But the first thing that we want to do is get all terms with variables on one side and just numbers on the other. This is the weirdest thing of completing the square. It's the only solution that the equal sign doesn't have a 0 on one side. Okay, so for this one, variables on one side, numbers on the other. That's the first step. Okay, so let's do that here. We have x and 4x here. I don't know where, anyway, whatever. X and 4x here, and then 8 needs to move because it doesn't have a letter, so it's going to go to the other side. So I wind up getting 2x squared minus 4x equals 8. Now the easiest way to solve this, okay, is we need to get rid of this 2. Okay, you can't have a number here or the completing perfect square thing doesn't work. Okay, so we have to divide all of these pieces by 2. This is the easiest route to take, so just bear with me here, okay? Sometimes you're going to get a fraction over here, but guess what? You have calculators. You'll be fine. So it's x squared minus 2x equals 4. Now notice I left a space here because I want to make this a perfect square equation. I'm going to add a number to this side that's going to make this a perfect square. Okay, so the number I'm going to add to this side is that process that we just did. So there's that. We're going to take that 2, divide it by 2, and then I'm going to square this number. So negative 1 squared is a positive 1. Now I can't just add 1 to one side of an equation. I have to then add it to the other side. So that's the fun. So now I have my perfect square equation. So the basic idea is, let's just change colors real quick. Okay, letters on one side, numbers on the other. Make sure this number is 1. So you may have to divide everything by whatever that number is. Okay, take this number, divide it by 2. It goes here. Square it, and it goes up here, here, and here on both sides of the equation. Now we have our perfect square equation, which in general is pretty simple to solve, but that was the completing the square step. Divide by 2 to get this number, square it, add it to both sides, and you can see like I do 2 steps at once because it's just easier, in my opinion. Okay, so we have this perfect square equation. All I have to do is square root both sides and then add 1. Maybe other things to do, but that's the idea. Okay, you may have to reduce that radical 5 if possible, or you may not. Okay, but that's it. We'll do all the different examples in class as we go. Okay, find the exact, so let's just do one more so you can see how it works. We want these letters here. We want this 9 to go to the other side. There's no number here, so we're good. We can just complete the square step now. So this is how I set up the completing the square. I make it look exactly the way I want it. So I take this 4, I divide it by 2, and I put that number in here. I square this, and it goes on both sides. That is your completing the square step. Okay, now you have a perfect square equation, and now you just have to solve it. Okay, so getting to that point is important, and now we have to try and take it a step further by taking the square root. So x plus 2 equals plus or minus. Remember, there's a negative here, so it becomes an I. And then subtract 2. Nothing really to reduce here, and we're done. Okay, so do your best on the Now You Try, and we'll see you tomorrow. See how it goes. Have a good day.